Parkland at this hour as grieving parents begin to bury their children today. We're learning troubling new information about an accused mass murderer. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith.
Yeah, I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. It's a big hour coming up here. Nicholas Cruz, first of all, confessed to killing 17 children and adults in South Florida on Wednesday. Investigators are filling in the blanks, of which there are many, revealing chilling new details about the massacre. Meanwhile, at the White House, it's telling us last hour that it's sparing no effort in dealing with this tragedy.
The situation on Wednesday is so tragic, it's so horrific. We need to do everything that we can, as he said, working with state and local officials to help secure our schools, to improve our systems for mental health, and to prevent madmen like this from ever wreaking havoc on schools and communities ever again.
We have Fox team coverage for you. Doug McKelway is at the White House, and Chris Wallace is standing by with analysis. But we begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge in Washington with the latest on this fast-moving investigation. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Sandra. Good morning. A law enforcement source tells Reuters that the FBI is conducting a review and whether mistakes were made with the YouTube tip. The lead FBI agent for the Miami field office, Robert Lasky, is now providing more detail about the September 2017 online comment about being a professional school shooter posted under the same name as the suspect, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz. Agent Lasky said the lead came from Mississippi and then quickly went cold.
After receiving this information, FBI Jackson conducted an interview of the person who made the complaint. This person lives in Mississippi, has no connection to South Florida, and has no knowledge about the person who posted the comment. The FBI also conducted internal database reviews and open source checks. No additional information was found to positively identify the person who posted this comment.
Fox News has asked the FBI whether the agents tried and failed to recover the computer IP address. This is the unique string of numbers that identifies every computer like a phone number. Former FBI agents are mixed on whether there was enough information to go to a grand jury and seek a subpoena for the information from YouTube, but some argue it would have been a logical next step given the nature of the threat to a school. Sandra.
Catherine, is the shooter going to get the death penalty?
On Fox this morning, Sandra, Florida's Attorney General said the death penalty applies in this case because of the severity and what appears to be some level of advanced planning.
The death penalty in Florida we take very seriously, of course. Anyone who, in general, who is cold, calculated, premeditated, something that is well thought out, something that is planned, something that is organized in advance, those all weigh very heavily in. They look at everything, and with 17 dead children, all of which the parents I know now, I'm certain they will be seeking death.
School crime scene is still being processed and the student witnesses are being conducted to build a case against the 19-year-old suspect. The FBI is also pulling together a digital profile based on his social media activity, phone records, text messages, and emails. Agent Lasky described those next steps.
We are looking into his social media posts, his movements, his conversations leading up to the shooting, as well as any other indicators that may be out there.
We get a response from the FBI to our originally query about the IP address, and we made that query yesterday. We'll, of course, bring it right to you, Sandra.
Catherine Herridge, thank you.
President Trump will head to Florida later today. He'll spend the weekend at Mar-a-Lago, and before he leaves, he will get a full briefing on the Parkland massacre. Doug McKelway, live at the White House with me now. And Doug, good morning there. He will, will the president visit Parkland? He's going to be about, 40 miles away in southeast Florida?
Right, Bill. The only thing we've heard from the White House at this juncture is that the visit to Parkland will come, quote, in the coming days. Because he is headed to Mar-a-Lago this afternoon at 3 o'clock, leaving the White House at 3 o'clock, it's safe to assume that that visit will happen over the weekend, but the logistical problems associated with such a fairly spontaneous visit are fairly difficult because you've got the active police investigation still ongoing, and if the president should try to meet with any of the survivors or families of the deceased, that adds another layer of complexity to the logistical problem. So we'll see, but it's safe to assume it will happen this weekend. In the interim, the White House is steering clear of any controversy associated with the gun control issue associated with yet another mass shooting. Listen very carefully to what the president said. This is a key part of what he said yesterday in his remarks after the shooting.
Our administration is working closely with local authorities to investigate the shooting and learn everything we can. We are committed to working with state and local leaders to help secure our schools and tackle the difficult issue of mental health.
Mental health. He did not mention gun control at all in those remarks yesterday. And in addition, he came into huge criticism as a result of that. Meanwhile, members of his cabinet are sending some mixed signals. Attorney General Jeff Sessions basically towed his boss's lines in comments yesterday.
To study the intersection of mental health and criminality and violence, and to identify how we can stop people before these heinous crimes occur.
But in testimony before Congress yesterday, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin suggested that gun control is a part of this equation.
I think the gun violence, it's a tragedy what we've seen yesterday, and I'd urge Congress to look at these issues.
And Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah, in comments to you guys just a few minutes ago, also did not mention gun control. The White House wants to clearly avoid that. Bill?
Doug, on the immigration matter, does the White House see a way through the gridlock that we watched late yesterday afternoon in the Senate?
You know, I don't think anybody sees a way through the gridlock at this point. Of the 4 proposals that were shot down in the Senate yesterday, the one that was most favored by the White House was the one that got the fewest votes. The White House blamed Schumer Democrats for the snafu. In a statement about 11 o'clock last night, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said that the whole bill was held hostage by the radical left of the Democratic Party. The Wall Street Journal, however, in an editorial this morning, criticized the White House. It noted that the amendment with the best chances of passage was the one sponsored by Susan Collins of Maine and Mike Rounds of South Dakota that had the support of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. The Wall Street Journal said, and I quote, "It included the president's biggest priorities as well as the concessions from both parties, but it fell 6 votes short of 60 after the White House issued a veto threat." This morning, Raj Shah maintained the White House's hard line.
We still want to see the Senate act on the immigration bill put forward by Senator Chuck Grassley. It was one of the 4 that you mentioned. Our proposal is pretty straightforward.
Congress is now out for the entire next week, so, Bill, don't look for any quick resolutions.
Well, thank you, Doug.
My pleasure.
More to come. Doug McElwee from the North Lawn.
For more on all this, Chris Wallace is the anchor of Fox News Sunday, and he joins us now. Chris, good morning.
Morning to you, Sandra.
What is the conversation in Washington this morning?
You talk about guns or immigration?
I wonder what they're talking about. You know, Nancy Pelosi now says she's going to put, gun control above anything else, even above the upcoming elections. That is her priority. And we're listening to a president that's avoiding the gun control debate. He wants to focus on mental health. So let's talk about the conversation that's happening right now following this mass shooting.
Well, there's a lot of talk, and, you know, it's like Casablanca, round up the usual suspects. Democrats are pushing gun control solutions. Republicans are talking, including the president, about everything except guns, mental health, school security, perhaps having more guns on the inside. But, you know, I don't know whether it's being pessimistic or realistic, but we've been here all too often. We've been through these terrible tragedies, and people start searching for solutions. People start pressing, and nothing happens. Take an example, for instance, last October with the horrific shooting, the worst mass shooting in this country's history in Las Vegas. I think 59 people killed, and we learned, a lot of us, for the first time about bump stocks, these devices that aren't even part of guns but allow semi-automatic rifles to fire faster, like automatic rifles. The president talked about doing something about it. The NRA talked about doing something about it. You know what's happened since October?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
So there's this Axios report this morning, Chris. They're reporting, their sources at the White House are saying the president says we have to do something to his staff. And he actually asked White House officials to tell him what our options are. What do you think this president is willing to do?
Well, that's a good question. One of the reporters for Axios was on special report last night, Jonathan Swan, their crack White House reporter, and he talked about the fact that this could be a Nixon to China moment, in the sense that somebody who's a big gun supporter could conceivably push for some gun controls. But as Jonathan said, he doesn't think that the president wants to go to China. In other words, he's a strong believer. He's changed his view over the years, but he's a strong believer in the Second Amendment. It was one of his strongest lines on the campaign trail, full support for the right to bear arms. So whether he has any interest at all in going down that route and limiting, if not obviously people's right to guns, that's been settled by the Supreme Court, but limiting, for instance, assault weapons, limiting these high-capacity magazines, there's certainly no indication of it so far, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the president, in his 7-minute speech yesterday, never mentioned the word guns. And look, there are a lot of people who think that's not the problem, that the problem is mental health, that it is lack of security, that the wrong people are getting guns, that we're not enforcing the laws we already have. You know, it's like a lot of issues. You can have people of good faith on both sides of the issue, but if the country, or in this case the Congress, is so split, nothing gets done.
Before I let you go, Chris, can you give us an update on where things stand with immigration? Multiple proposals fail in the Senate, months of negotiations, and here we are Friday morning ahead of a holiday weekend. Where does this go?
Nowhere. You know, the fact is you had everything from the president's plan, which got the fewest votes, only 39, so 21 votes short of a filibuster-proof majority, to the bipartisan plan, which the White House really came out very strongly against, even before it was voted on. As Doug McKelway mentioned, a threat of a presidential veto. The Department of Homeland Security said it would be giving up on enforcing our borders. That got 54 votes, still 6 short of the majority. The House is talking about passing something called the Goodlatte plan. He's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, but that's even more conservative than the president's plan, because that wouldn't even give the Dreamers a path to citizenship 10 or 12 years down the road. They could apply for the ability to stay in this country for 3 years, in effect, permits. That would be a complete non-starter with the Democrats. So even if it does pass the House, there's not a chance that will pass the Senate. Let me just say one more quick thing in that regard, Sandra, and that is, to a certain degree, I think that the court ruling that basically said that the president's rescission, his rolling back of DACA protection, has hurt this issue, because now that March 5th deadline really isn't a deadline. And I think that, you know, Congress doesn't, if there's no deadline, Congress doesn't act.
All right, we'll see where that goes. Chris Wallace, thank you. And make sure to watch Fox News Sunday this weekend. Rush Limbaugh will be on the program, as well as former Congresswoman Gabby Gifford's husband, astronaut Mark Kelly. Many thanks to Chris Wallace. We'll see you this weekend.
See you Sunday. As we mentioned here, Florida Senators Marco Rubio, Bill Nelson set to arrive any moment at the scene in Parkland, Florida. We'll take you there when that gets underway. Also, we will speak with Republican Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. He was in the Oval Office this week with the president, so he's coming up in a matter of moments.
Plus, we are now learning one student came face-to-face with Nikolas Cruz on Wednesday before that shooting took place. What the gunman told him next. Bannon could be impacting the Russia investigation. We'll have more on that.
There is new scrutiny also after Republican allegations of surveillance abuse, as a FISA court says it will take a closer look, but give us some more time. Jason Chaffetz standing by to weigh in on that. Coming up next.
The most secretive court in the nation is now responding to top Republican lawmakers on criminal warrants and that anti-Trump dossier. Allegations of surveillance abuse against a Trump campaign aide could be receiving a fair hearing. One of those lawmakers joined us last hour.
The investigation that Chairman Trey Gowdy of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and I, as Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, launched some months ago. And as part of that, the issue of how the court arrived at the decisions they made and what documents they received from the FBI, Chairman Gowdy and I have had the opportunity to look at the underlying documents behind the Nunes memo, and we have a lot of questions about it.
All right, former Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah is a Fox News contributor. He joins us now, and I'm sure you still have a lot of questions, sir.
I do. I used to be on the House Judiciary Committee, and look, it's a problem if a court, as secretive as the FISA court is, will not allow members of Congress with top security clearances to be able to review the meetings and the proceedings themselves. Remember, it's Congress that enabled the FISA court. They wrote the legislation. They just renewed it. And you would think that the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and people like Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe, former prosecutors, should be able to go in and see what those proceedings are like.
So what's next with the memo, by the way, that was crafted by Democrats?
Look, I hope it gets approved, but Adam Schiff knows full well that he cannot include sources and methods. He was flailing with his arms and just making a big deal about the Republican memo. Ended up that what he said wasn't true, but he knows that he can't put sources and methods in there. So they have to edit this back, and I'm sure that the White House will gladly release it upon that doing that.
All right. I know you have some strong thoughts on the White House's handling of Rob Porter and his employment there. We were able to ask the White House through Raj Shah a few minutes ago about their handling of his employment there, and here's what he had to say.
We will do better going into the future. The security clearance process is a very important one. We trust and rely upon the professionals at the FBI as well as the White House Personnel Security Office to render solid judgments on these individuals. That process had not finished yet, and so ways to reform and fix the process are things that we're open to and considering, and we'll be working with Congress and others on that.
Did he get that right?
No, he didn't get that right, and I think that's very disingenuous. The security clearance process assumes guilt, not innocence. And so if you do sincerely believe in the FBI, when they give you the initial report, they're highlighting some real problems. Don't tell me that they haven't got to the finish line yet. You're talking about the inner sanctum of the White House, people that are looking at classified materials, close proximity to the president, and the first time the FBI tells you a problem, then you're going to need to separate that person. But you're guilty, not innocent. This is not a court proceeding, and they highlighted problems. And I think that's why Trey Gowdy has said that he's going to open up an investigation and look at the process top to bottom.
He did indeed, and we did ask the White House about that. Lastly, I wanted to ask you about Mitt Romney, and this he announced this morning that he is indeed launching his Utah Senate campaign. Your thoughts on that this morning?
Look, he's one of the most favorite sons of Utah. He's got deep, strong ties to Utah. Attended Brigham Young University, helped save the Olympics. His kids are here. His grandkids are here. He's got a Utah driver's license. And I think he'll be a great member of the United States Senate. I think he does believe that if you're going to make America great, you're going to have to tap into the goodness of the American people. And he says he wants to represent Utah's values. He was a great presidential nominee, and I think he'll do pretty darn well on the ballot here in Utah.
Says he's going to bring those values to Washington. Jason Chaffetz, thanks for coming on this morning.
Thanks, Andrew.
A new twist in the Michael Flynn case. What the judge in that matter reportedly asked of Bob Mueller's team to turn over. Next, what could that clue mean? We now see new focus on General Michael Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor. The general pleading guilty, remember, to one count of lying to the feds. The judge in that case reportedly asked Bob Mueller's team to produce any evidence favorable to Flynn. Byron York writes in the Washington Examiner, quote, observers are buzzing about a series of events in the last 60 days in the case of Michael Flynn, the Trump national security advisor who on December 1st pleaded guilty to one count of lying to the FBI in the Trump-Russian matter. John McCormick, senior writer, Weekly Standard, with me now to look at this. And John, we're reading tea leaves. Good morning to you, by the way. We're reading, trying to find some clues here. The judge was replaced. The new judge is a stickler. He's been burned before, and he wants some sort of evidence to be presented. Do you see something changing in this case?
You know, it's too early to say, but it's an interesting development worth watching. The judge in this case, after Michael Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI, he told the prosecutors they needed to produce any potential evidence that was favorable to Flynn in his plea or his sentencing. And so just this week, Bob Mueller has offered to provide this evidence and said that it should strictly pertain to this case and not be used for any other cases. So it's something definitely worth watching. As you mentioned, this judge had been burned once before by prosecutors in a case against a former senator from Alaska. It turned out after the senator was was convicted, that evidence came out that that exonerated him, that was exculpatory. And so this judge has been very much a stickler. He said that he wants evidence that even if Mueller doesn't think it's exculpatory, he wants to look at it. He wants to view this himself, the judge, and to make that determination whether this in any way would affect Flynn's sentencing or the plea.
Right. Now, again, I want to repeat, Flynn pleaded guilty, but if there is new evidence out there, that would be very interesting if you're thinking about changing the course of this legal proceeding.
It would, and so we're in the realm of speculation now. The sentencing has been delayed until May, and we don't know why that is.
Right.
Could it be because Flynn is cooperating with the prosecution, or because they're waiting to see?
We thought he already was, right, John?
Yeah, well, of course. So we don't really know exactly whether this new development is playing any role in this delay of the sentencing.
Okay, Steve Bannon apparently met with Mueller's team this past week for 20 hours. Over several days. Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on that committee, has really been hot on that trail, had this to say about Bannon's appearance on Capitol Hill. Roll this.
I think it is likely he'll face a contempt citation. My colleagues, I think, in the GOP on our committee have committed themselves. Now, they can always uncommit themselves. But a number of them have said publicly before yesterday that if the committee takes no for an answer, it will not only impair our own investigation, but it will impair all future congressional investigations.
Okay, listen, we'll see where that goes, and, we'll put a hold on that for now. What is key to Bannon's questioning, do you believe, with Bob Mueller's team?
I think it'll be really interesting whether or not he talks more freely than he has with Congress. I think the real question is whether there's anything that isn't public information that substantiates Steve Bannon's claim that the meeting with Don Jr. And that Russian lawyer in Trump Tower, Bannon characterized that as, really bad stuff and unpatriotic, and went so far as calling it treason. It's really hard, really harsh attack on Don Jr. And so the question is there anything to sort of substantiate this idea that there was really serious wrongdoing by the Trump campaign?
Thank you, John. John McCormick, we'll take it a step at a time, okay? That's some breaking news.
All right, Senator Bill Nelson is speaking at the site of Wednesday's shooting in Florida. Let's listen.
Doesn't talk about Sandy Hook and Las Vegas and Columbine and so forth. So it is time for us to start a serious effort to try to wear down the opposition that is not letting us bring up common sense legislation like we couldn't even get past a couple of years ago, that if you're on the terrorist watch list, you can't buy a gun. That's about as common sense as anything. If you're on the terrorist list, you can't get on an airplane, but you can buy a gun. That's the condition that we find ourselves in, and the same thing with assault weapons put in the hands of irresponsible people. Maybe this will be the turning point. Maybe these students speaking out so boldly as they have on national TV, maybe the parents crying out and speaking so boldly as they have, that maybe this will be the turning point, because in fact enough is enough. Earlier on, I've reaffirmed, I can just tell you that when I was briefed by the headquarters of the FBI Wednesday night about 6:30, they are the ones that told me that the alarm was tripped. They also told me that there was a gas mask, and they thought smoke grenades. As it turned out, there was a gas mask. And in fact, the smoke apparently came from the discharge of the high velocity rounds, as well as hitting the ceiling. You see the result. It's carnage. So I hope this is a turning point for the entire country. I can tell you I speak for a lot of senators who have been through this. And just a year ago, we had a 14-hour filibuster that so many of us in the Democratic caucus went to the Senate floor and said, this has got to stop. Well, we're going to have to do that filibuster again, but I hope this is the turning point.
Is that how you change the status quo, though, Senator, then? Making a filibuster? I mean, because
you got to change it by changing the law. Now, changing the law means that you got to get the votes to get 60 votes. I know we'll have 49 votes in the Senate because that's the number of Democrats we have. You got to pick up 11 Republican senators to break the filibuster, in other words, to get to where you can consider the bill. It's called a motion for cloture. And 11 senators, by the way, 11 Republican senators, we couldn't even get yesterday afternoon to take the DACA Dreamers legislation to the floor. We ended up with only 54 votes. We had to have 60. You see how difficult these things are on something as common sense of helping the dreamers stay in this country.
Senator, are there any draft bills or anything out there right now that you think might get a second look at this point? Something that's already been out there that sort of sits somewhere in the middle that you could actually get some movement?
Yes, and I'm a co-sponsor of all of them. One of them, for example, is Senator Feinstein's bill. There are a number of us that are sponsoring it that says that you cannot legally purchase an assault weapon. And then it goes on for 100 pages to define what is an assault weapon and what is not an assault weapon. Collector's items, for example, would not be an assault weapon. But I'll tell you what is, and it's the two assault weapons that have got us here in Florida, the AR-15 and the Sig Sauer that took out 49 people in Orlando.
Senator, there's a lot of people who are saying, for years they've been saying, they want the shootings to come to an end, and they haven't come to an end. But the kids we're speaking to today have said, if you don't do it, if Marco Rubio doesn't do it, if the Senate doesn't do it, then they're going to do it. What do you tell them?
And don't forget Tallahassee, because the Florida legislature could make a law in this state to outlaw these assault weapons, as other states have done.
But what's your reaction to those kids and their anger?
Well, the kids are just terrific. The fact that they are speaking up as boldly as they are, maybe that's the turning point. You haven't heard students speak up one after another after they have witnessed this carnage and speaking with such conviction.
Some of these young people are calling for abolishing.
All right, that is Florida Democratic Senator Bill Nelson standing on the ground at the site of Wednesday's killing, 17 people dead. He's saying enough is enough. This has got to change. Common sense legislation. He is calling for more gun control laws in this country. Maybe this is a turning point, he said, standing on the ground there just 2 days after the shooting, and actually ventured into immigration conversation there
which was kind of interesting with the tent set up behind him. There were a lot of warning signs, Sandra, for this kid. There's a report out today suggesting the police were called to his home dozens of times going back 7-8 years. I want to bring Republican Senator right now, Tim Scott out of South Carolina. Sir, welcome to our program today. I see you're back home there in Charleston, South Carolina. And
yes, sir.
Let's start there in Charleston. I mean, you had your own story to deal with Dylan Roof walking into that African-American church and gunning down all those parishioners. You were with the president the other day in the Oval Office, and now you're called to reflect on this and try and figure out a way to keep America safe and make sure that people feel that they're safe in their communities. So no answers are easy. What's your answer today, Senator?
Bill, all the answers are hard at this point, and I certainly have been reflecting on the atrocity that occurred at a church where my uncle attended for more than 50 years. It was one of the, if not the worst church shooting in the history of South Carolina. My heart and my prayers go out to Parkland community. The reality of it is that there is something that we could have done and we should do, and that is to make sure that the NICS system works. Fix NICS. It could have prevented the illegal purchase of the gun that caused the atrocity in South Carolina. That is the one piece of legislation that we could not get across the finish line in the Senate. A second thing that we can do is to, like a laser, focus on the most pervasive, consistent issue in these mass shootings, which has been mental illness. We must figure out how to address that issue. And the crumbs, folks leave crumbs, and you can look through the social media of Mr. Cruz and you see crumbs everywhere. We've got to find a way to make sure that all those crumbs are exposed so that our law enforcement agencies can do all that is possible to stop these atrocities from occurring.
And on that note, you have to get people to speak up. And it doesn't appear in this case, there were warning signs, but no one took action.
Bill, you're right. The superintendent had, from my understanding, basically banned Mr. Cruz from coming back to the school. He came previously with munitions in a backpack. He also has been posting on his social media sites that he wanted, according to the information that I have, to have a church shooting. Over a year ago, he stopped going to mental health treatment, which suggests that he had an issue. There are so many signs. Unfortunately, all the signs does not bring back a single life. Yeah. And we have to make sure that our agencies are equipped with all the resources necessary to do their jobs. And information is a part of the resource that is necessary for our folks to do the job.
You gave us a few examples of what you would change, reflecting in your experience there in Charleston. But you were at the president the other day in the Oval Office, and now, over the next several weeks, the president says he's going to convene these groups, to whether they're attorneys general from different states or whether it's parents from Columbine or Sandy Hook. What is the expected path, do you believe, from the commander-in-chief?
Well, I think the president has sent a very positive signal with the comments made by Secretary Azar as it relates to examining and understanding the link between mental health and mass gun violence. This is a very important step. It is a pivot from the last several secretaries of the HHS. I believe that as we uncover more information of mental stability and health, we will be in a far better position to deal with the challenges that we currently face today.
Well, we're going to follow that and see where it gets us. You can really sense the country's frustration. It's been evident throughout the past week, and I see you shaking your head. I know you agree on that. Quickly, sir.
100%.
Go ahead.
100%. Listen, I am from Charleston. I was born and raised in a place where a gunman came into a church, killed my friend Clemente Pinckney, the pastor of the church, and 8 others. This is a very personal issue, and we all want to jump to solutions, and sometimes without understanding the problem. From Connecticut to California, some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country are in states where we've seen tremendous violence, and our heart goes out, and we want to do more than just say we were praying for folks and that our heart aches for folks. We want to find resolutions through legislation, and we haven't figured out how to legislate against evil. I'm not sure how we do that, but we should go back to the drawing board, back to the table, and convene a group of experts to figure out a stronger, better path forward for every single child that attends a school in America.
Senator, you were on the floor of the Senate yesterday when those amendments went down on an immigration matter. I asked Bob Goodlatte, yes, the Republican on the House side, he's leading the charge on the House side. I don't know what they're going to get done. He's optimistic. My impression was that immigration was dead on arrival. Is it in this Congress?
I don't think so. I am optimistic. One of the reasons why I'm so optimistic is the president did something that many of us found surprising and very intriguing. He said that he was willing to support a path to citizenship, a 12-year path to citizenship for DACAs, for these dreamers. And the reality of it was he put on the table 3 requirements. The first requirement is for us to provide border security. because we're looking at the fruit, which is the dreamers, but we have to make sure that we understand the root. We have to solve the problem of an immigration system that hasn't been working on from an illegal perspective. The second thing he wants to do is to change the visa lottery system and use those 50,000 visas to help families who are on a waiting list. That is a very important part of the process.
But
if we do those two things.
I get it, but I just don't know. I don't see the votes right now. Last thought on that, then we're going to hop.
Well, they're not there yet, but I think we should be optimistic.
Thank you, sir. You're welcome anytime here. Tim Scott.
Thank you very much, Bill.
You bet. Back in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you, Sandra.
The gun laws already on the books did not stop that Florida shooter from getting his hands on an arsenal of weapons, but there were so many warning signs of a very troubled young man. So is the problem largely